Hey guys, this is a general response video to Thou Art That's question to me as what did I think of Daniel Dennett's theory of consciousness, and secondly, Thomas Mattis, his response video, India's Tripolar Dialectic. And a couple months back, um, Matt, John, and I were talking about, I think I made a video called Consciousness Explained, or Is It? And I basically kind of just went over some of the theories, and it basically was broken down to one theory of consciousness being the mysteriums, and then the other just being the traditional empirical consciousness is explained by everything that we know, we just have to work out the details. So we sort of have a physicalist and a mysterium um, dialectic. And Thomas Mattis brought up that a better way to see this, or perhaps a more complex way to see this, would be not to see things as either or, which I think is what I was trying to go for in the video, that, these are two things that have good points, um, but as something in between, something that serves as a third transcendent component to theories of consciousness, something that can answer the question and reconcile the Mysterium's points and also the Physicalist points, uh, and without needing to go either way, because we need the mysterious points. Um, when That showed me the video on Dennett, he was basically saying, look, the components of consciousness, when it comes down to it, are describable right here in the brain. There's nothing more we need. There is nothing mysterious about our brains and our minds, as much as we'd like to think they're somehow transcendent. Um, Basically, the neurons and the cells and the biology of the human body and the human brain are responsible entirely for consciousness. There's nothing else that needs to be explained except for the details of how it works out. We know it's in the brain, it's nowhere else, and we're going to work out all the little details as time goes on. And at least that's the impression I got from it. But he also made another assertion. Um, Dennett said, hey, most of these Mysterians like to think that consciousness is somehow unique or mysterious or elusive. But really, they don't even know that much about their own consciousness. And then he kind of gave a couple examples of, I mean, I know he had a point, but these things were sort of parlor tricks. I mean, taking two images next to each other, one is only slightly different, and the other one um, has, I don't know, some missing element, and you have to tell the difference. And most people can't tell these little things. There's little loopholes in the way of perceiving. But I don't think this necessarily addresses the point. I mean, these are, tricks of consciousness, tricks of perception. But it doesn't really say much about human value systems, other types of experiences, and self-awareness in general. Uh, I mean, you can argue that you can trick a camera in a particular way not to pick up on something. I mean, this isn't really explaining consciousness. It's just saying the mechanics of it are physically describable and we can manipulate them. And the fact that we can manipulate your experience means that it must be objectified. And I think that's the general logic he's going with. But I don't necessarily think that is entirely correct. So trying to put this in a more, I guess, third way perspective, we might want to see it like this. So just because just because we don't know the mechanics of it, um, it doesn't mean that it doesn't exist. It doesn't mean that there's a lot of mechanics behind consciousness, behind perception, behind seeing, and even thinking, or cognition. Obviously, it's grounded in physical reality, but to talk of consciousness as uh, to use the language to merely reduce consciousness to the mechanics of it is to sort of miss the point. I think there is room for talking about the mechanics of it, just as you would any kind of organism. In order to understand any kind of physical organism, you can't just talk about its aura or its spirit. You have to talk about the biology behind it. You have for a plant, you have to talk about photosynthesis and how it gains nutrients from the soil, and the different stages of plant development. These are very biological things that are physically and empirically observable. When it comes to mind, I think there is an emergent quality, as Thomas Mattis was saying, there is an emergent quality, a transcendent quality as well, that the Mysterians are getting at. And it's not that these two things are butting heads, they're just talking about two different things. And now, don't get me wrong here, I do sympathize with the Mysterians. Um, and I think they're really just reacting to the more physicalists trying to say consciousness is really just this thing. Um, but I wouldn't say the Mysterians are wrong for saying there's more to it. And I wouldn't say the more objectified empiricists are saying there's nothing more to it. I mean, it's a very conservative thing to say there's nothing more to consciousness. But, I mean, I think they could be a little bit more open-minded. So, basically, I think Dennett's reasoning um, is it has a point, but it is also flawed when he says the reason why consciousness is already explained is because Mysterians um, don't realize there's so many tricks you can play with the way you perceive things. It has nothing to do with self-awareness. That's the real mystery. That is still a mystery. Now, whether or not we can describe that, still, I don't think will actually give us a more direct understanding of it. And what I mean by that is, even if we knew how to reproduce consciousness, to recreate consciousness, create artificial intelligence in a laboratory, um, that's still an equation, that's still a mathematical description, which is different than a, a more psychological, experiential component. So all I'm really saying is consciousness is a direct experience that no science will be able ever to reduce. It's just a silly question to reduce it. There's nothing to reduce. I mean, it's like describing a flavor and tasting it. Yeah, you can tell me why I'm tasting it the way I'm tasting it, but I think a more synergistic perspective of what consciousness is, that it's not just a mechanical thing, but an organically grown sort of process. And that may sound very vague, but really I'm saying probably when we understand it more, there's going to be a crazy amount of synergy in all these different processes that helps it emerge. Um, so crazy that the science today behind what we understand of consciousness will seem simplistic and oversimplistic. Uh, but then there's the next question: Is consciousness more than the brain? Is it more? Not is it just emergent in its own? Not because what I'm basically saying is it can be described. Um, it has to be described in its own terms, reconciling the more physical terms too. You need that to understand the mechanics behind it, why and what it happens. But consciousness also has its own terminology, its own higher order of description. But then the question still remains: no matter what you think about that, is it emergent? Is there spirit? Can consciousness exist without the brain? Then that's the interesting question. That's beyond empirical science, and that's probably why they will continue to tell you, no, there's no reason to think that. I mean, empirical science is empirical for a reason. There's a particular objectifying of the world that they focus on. So of course they're going to say that for now. Um, but I think a healthier attitude would be to sort of not negotiate, but at least leave room for more possibilities, and thus leave room for more exploration by folks like, I don't know, any kind of neuroscientist who thinks there may be something to out-of-body experiences, even meditative experiences, or even near-death experiences where the body seems to shut down and we know information and are aware of things that we shouldn't be able to be. Um, so there's so many more questions left with consciousness. I don't think it's explained. I think Dennett's on the right track about some things, but other things, there's still a lot of room for new evidence. But at any rate, thanks for chatting about this, make a response.